Why is this approach not working?
Yeah, I cringe every time I just see an API wrapper and it's called a tool. Because if you think about how these API endpoints are written, they're written with the assumption that the downstream consumer is going to have some type of intricate and robust system put in place to process and validate and even handle like complex responses. So if you simply just wrap an API endpoint, you're just putting all of that work on the language model. And with something that's non-deterministic, it's not always the best idea. So you might enable a language model to be able to take a new action by giving it just an API wrapper, but it's going to fail like half the time. Some examples that I've run into is, so I have two for you. One is the post processing. So after you hit the API endpoint, how do you provide that response to the language model? So if the API endpoint, which they commonly do, returns some deeply nested dictionary that's like maybe is representing some kind of tree structure of your file structure, like how are you going to make sure that the language model correctly understands that? Or if the API endpoint's returning this deeply nested structure just to represent like the content on a page, how are you going to ensure that the language model presents this information to the end user correctly? And the solution for that is write deterministic code that converts it into Markdown, for example. We've been able to do this for decades. Let's continue to do it. Let's just not forget how to write code just because a language model can automate some of the things that can't be expressed programmatically. Another example is if we take the Slack API, it loves to rely on user IDs. But if I want a language model to send a DM to you, Mateo, on Slack, I'm not going to say send a DM to user 9644282. I'm going to say send a DM to Mateo. And so that requires this machine experience engineering to have a tool that takes a username as input or an email as input and programmatically figure out what is the corresponding user ID that we can then provide to the API.